Good morning. I'm going to talk, as people already have, about the Council of Europe recommendations and a little about the origin of the EPA. It's hard to say when the EPA started. It sort of emerged, and you could say it was conceived in Oxford in 1989. The initiative in the first place of an English prison teacher, Pam Bedford. She's now known as Pam Radcliffe. Then it had a rather long gestation. An ad hoc committee was formed along the way. But we can't really say an organisation was properly born until Sigtuna in Sweden in 1993, because in Sigtuna there were two developments that made the EPA a proper organisation. One, the EPA constitution was adopted, and probably just as importantly, the first EPA t-shirt appeared. I think that one was produced in a Norwegian prison. From the beginning, an important intention of the EPA was that there was to support prison educators on the ground in particular through European cooperation. A key influence in the formation of the EPA was the Council of Europe report and its 17 recommendations, the education in prison. More than 20 years later, that document, some of it I think is quite a bit out of date, but I hope that the concept of education proposed in it and the 17 recommendations maybe remain, I think they do remain a core part of the EPA objectives, and I think are still relevant. So Erlander referred to some of the recommendations yesterday. I'm going to also do that. The first recommendation one is that all prisoners, and that's important, the all is important, all prisoners shall have access to education, which is envisaged as consisting of classroom subjects, vocational education, creative and cultural activities, physical education and sport, social education, and library facilities. So it's like an orange with many important segments. Recommendation 2 is that education in prison should be like the education provided for similar age groups in the outside world. What that's really saying is, for adults anyway, it should be an adult education approach. And the range of learning opportunities in prison should be as wide as possible. So again, there you have the idea of a wide range of activities, a wide concept of education. Recommendation 5 is that education should have no less a status than work within the prison regime, and prisoners should not lose out financially or otherwise by taking part in education. So the Council of Europe asserts there a strong and central role for prison education. A crucial recommendation, which I focus a lot on this morning, is recommendation number 3. Education in prison shall aim to develop the whole person, bearing in mind his or her social, economic and cultural context. And you've seen these recommendations on t-shirts and so on, nowhere else. Erlander had a t-shirt yesterday, a rather white one or a beige one. Mine was a rather fetching black one. And I'll refer to that there. I mean, these t-shirts have been available over conference over many years, and I know one of our American friends here, Bill Booth, actually claims to wear it in the street. Now, maybe you can do that sort of thing in America, but we Europeans tend to be more restrained. One of my colleagues in Ireland, who's been to quite a number of EPA conferences over the years, Catherine, she accumulated a number of EPA t-shirts, and she tells me she wears them in bed. And She also quotes her husband as saying that he always knows he's in difficulty when he starts reading, all prisoners shall have access to education, and the education should be like the world outside and so forth. So the Council of Europe report that's built around these recommendations has two overall complementary themes. One, as I've already mentioned, an adult education approach to teaching in prison. And secondly, education should be constantly seeking ways to link prisoners with the outside community. These are complementary and with each other. The report argues that education in prison has a much wider purpose than trying to get prisoners to stop committing crime, or for that matter, trying to get them into jobs. The report states the aims, if you like, of prison education, and these here are direct quotes from the report. I think they're worth looking at. Firstly, prison is of its very nature abnormal and destructive of the personality in a number of ways. So education has, among other elements of the prison system, the capacity to render this situation less abnormal, to limit somewhat the damage done to men and women through prison. So it's a kind of a limiting role, but a very important role. It's often forgotten in the talk of recidivism and so forth, that prison itself is what sociologists would call criminogenic. Sending somebody to prison is the best way you can make sure that they come back to prison. So that idea is there in that objective. Education can help undo some of the damage of prison. Secondly, there is the argument-based injustice. A high proportion of prisoners have a very limited and negative post-education experience, so that on the basis of equality of opportunity, they are now entitled to special support to allow their educational disadvantage to be addressed. So that's, if you like, the idea of education as a right. And then we have the third argument, which is the one the public generally assume is our objective, but it's in here as number 3. The rehabilitative one. Education has the capacity to encourage and help those who try to turn away from crime. So the kind of education envisaged by the Council of Europe covers a wide range. Think of all those segments of education listed in Recommendation 1. And these should be offered to all prisoners. It should have a very broad role, including modifying the effects of imprisonment on men and women and offering a chance of development to citizens who have not had that chance very often before, as well as helping them look to their futures after prison. And the education we're supposed to offer can be seen as a deep kind of education, in that it seeks to develop the person at many levels. And we go back here to Recommendation 3. The whole person, bearing in mind his or her social, economic and cultural context. By the way, that exact phrase was not made up by the members of the Select Committee on Prison Education, but taken directly from a much earlier Council of Europe document about adult education in the community. The idea is that if this is what adult education should be doing in the community, then that's good enough for us in prison education. Also, that's what we should be doing too. So it's, way beyond, issues of recidivism or addressing reoffending and so forth. So perhaps you'll understand then how I was a little concerned when I saw that the theme of this conference was to be, at first appearance anyway, a focus on helping people into work. That, of course, is a vital aspect of prison education. Vocational education, you recall, is one segment of the education that is to be offered and listed in Recommendation 1. But it is only one of several key areas. And I suppose knowing the EPA and the people who worked in it, I should be reassured that there is no plan to limit or restrict what prison education tries to do. However, I am aware that in many places there are strong pressures, coming especially from politicians, or those people Erlander spoke so highly of yesterday, and often prison administrators. There are sometimes pressures to limit prison education in a number of ways, and one of these, curtailments or restrictions, is to say the main purpose of prison education is to train people for work. And take, for example, a man called Lord Filton. To recently he was Minister for Offender Education. That's a sort of junior minister job in England. He said, very bluntly, the sole purpose of, sole priority of education, that's education in prison, is to get offenders into work. Anything else is a means, not an end. I have a lot of problems with that statement, not least the use of the offensive term, offender. Even if you wanted to prioritise employment and ignore other critical areas of need, such as housing, overcoming addiction, mental illness, or social exclusion, wider development of the person is often needed if they are to get and hold on to jobs. Such wider development may include, for example, acquiring some general education, achieving a more positive sense of self, or being able to engage more fully in social life. Aspects Lena mentioned on opening night, and our man from the EU, Tapio Zavala, stressed in the video link yesterday. There are other problems with too narrow a focus on getting people into jobs. Training in prison is often not very well geared in reality to the labour market. It seldom includes sufficient familiarisation with information technology needed for work. And in many countries, including my own, the working day is no such thing. People are lucky to be in workshops 3 or 4 hours in a day. The most glaring lack of reality, however, in a large number of European countries at present, is that the jobs are just not there. And certainly not for those coming out of prison, given their demographic profile and socioeconomic background. Maybe there is some realistic chance of work after imprisonment in Iceland and some northern European countries. There's not much in much of Europe. That's not the case. I mean, youth unemployment in Greece is over 60%, and is very high also in Spain, Portugal, Ireland, and Britain. However, the most important point is that the over-focus on teaching prisoners skills for work, to over-focus on that, not to, it's okay to teach it, to over-focus on it, is to neglect wider dimensions of education. In contrast to Lord Filkin, I would like to offer a different perspective, this time from a former Director General of the prison system in Finland, KJ Lang. After a detailed and insightful description of the troubled backgrounds, the life experiences, and the needs of those in his prisons, Lang made this statement. First of all, prisoners' clients need to improve their self-confidence. Therefore, all our efforts in organising correctional service should be analysed as to their ability to support, uphold, and redress the self-esteem of the prisoner. It should be noted that Lang advocated this role to support, uphold, and redress the self-esteem of the prisoner for the prison service as a whole, not just for prison education, but it certainly is a role that is very appropriate for education. I would suggest everything in prison education should be a means to this end, not the end that Lord Filton prescribes. Of course, to get a job and earn one's living is one important way to gain self-confidence and to boost self-esteem. It's a hugely important way, but it is one among many. It makes no sense, however, to put all our eggs in one basket. By the way, KJ Lang, who is now dead, made this statement, I don't know if any of you know, at an EPA conference 20 years ago in Sigtuna. And at that time, nowadays EPA conferences are more sensibly organised in that we have a final dinner on a Saturday night and there are no plenary sessions on Sunday morning. That was not the case at that time. So on Saturday night, some people stayed up late and some people drank, and not the Irish, of course, but some people were in that situation and came into a plenary session on Sunday morning, and I remember thinking, you know, this is going to be hard work now, an hour listening to somebody, and it was one of the most inspiring talks I have heard from anyone on subjects of prisons and prison education, and it's there on I think on the EPA website. If you look up the '93 report, you'll see KJ Lang's talk. I've been talking about vocational education, but there are a number of ways in which prison education can be reduced or hollowed out, can be diverted from the wide and deep role it should have. One of these narrow paths is Lord Filkins, whom I quoted earlier. Let's call it the over-focus on employment. I'll mention three others briefly. There can be an over-focus on addressing offender behaviour, where the task is to try and divert the person from criminal ways by often rather confrontational methods. There can be an over-focus on the measurable, on those aspects of education which can most easily be assessed by bureaucracy, such as to the neglect of more significant personal development that is more difficult to measure, such as building self-confidence and redressing self-esteem. Finally, in many of our countries, not all, but many of our countries where punitive approaches dominate, there tends to be a very negative and demonized perception of the man and woman in prison, such that they are seen to be undeserving of educational resources. Why should we give these people these facilities? We need to guard against all these restrictions. Now, for the remainder of my talk, I wish to draw on other voices which reflect what I call the wide and deep possibilities of prison education, the wide role education in prison can have, the protection and redress it can offer, the opportunities for real change it can open up. Some of these voices reflect the wisdom of those who have worked in the field for many years. The most insightful, however, are the words of prisoners themselves, sharing their reflections as to what they can get from prison education. These words are drawn from a selection of research projects, and I've picked just some I'm familiar with, and I know there are many other research projects which do the same thing. So, first of all, a man called Bill Forster was Professor of Adult Education in England. He took a great interest in prison education, and well over 30 years ago he asked men in 5 prisons in England what they felt they had gained from studying at the Open University. He noted in particular how they emphasised the effect upon their personality and attitudes, commented on the marked feelings of cultural change, and valued being regarded as students rather than prisoners. For example, one said, "They say that all criminals are inadequate. Well, I'm adequate at this." Another said, "My sort of crime you did for the excitement and the hope that you might get away with it. School was a dead loss and I don't remember getting away with any exams. While I'm in here, I find these ideas exciting and I can pass exams with no bother." Another said, "I use this course to regain my self-respect. It's a lifeline. It reaches outside. I'm a member of the university, and that means I'm still a member of the human race." Many of his interviewees valiant study, as he calls it, an antidote to a sentence. It made time pass quickly. And he says that was a theme many of them returned to. Some of you will know Anne Costello, former chairperson of the EPA. Well, Anne undertook a PhD study on why people study also at university level in prison and found a similar range of motivations. She classified these in order of importance, and they're alleviate boredom, self-development, sense of achievement, get a job on release. So that one is there, but it was down at number 4. Clearly, most students had multiple reasons for study and recognised many benefits from it. Many were influenced by the prison context, and here's what some of them said. When I first came here, I was never in prison before. I found time was dragging. So that's the initial motivation, just to do something, use up time. But then often stronger motivation develop. That's a normal thing in adult education. Now I do it for myself to get a sense of satisfaction. And the next one said, I was sick of sitting around listening to all the drug talk, non-stop, banging on every hour of the day. It was wrecking my head. Another said, it opens you up. That's education. It's adding to your knowledge and making you know more and question more. It makes you more than a junkie or whatever, a robber or a scumbag that others might think. I've learned a lot of things and how it's all right to know things and explain yourself. And finally, studying has given me a more positive spin on things. I feel I can do anything I want to now. I'm looking forward to using it when I get out. So these reasons have much to do with gaining self-confidence and self-respect. In Anne's study, getting a job after release was important for some. And the first guy there thought it was going to be hard enough getting a job without a criminal record, but harder still without a qualification. So getting a job is a motivation there. But the next guy is probably more technical, and he wrote out a huge array of motivations. I think they're quite honest. I know this guy. He lives and works quite near where I live now, and I see him every now and again. He's working in a community project. But his motivations were complex, and I think more typical. He says, my motivations for studying in prison are many. The combination of boredom, wanting to please others and restore some pride in yourself, and awareness that your offspring may someday look to you for assistance with their studies, being conscious of your own ignorance and lack of knowledge, a stubborn streak to keep you going in the face of adversity, or when told you're not capable, wanting to keep your head down and get on with things quietly as a means of escape, anything to keep your mind focused and as far removed from reality as possible, to promote a sense of self-confidence, to experience the pleasure of learning, gaining knowledge simply for its own sake, not to mention costing the authorities money. And I think that's okay too. Now, while Anne Costello and Bill Foster explored motivation among prisoners engaged in higher education, Cormac Bean, who some of you may also know, investigated the reason prisoners study at all levels. But he found a similar range of motivations. The motivations and benefits, the motivations for and benefits of education, he found were, and I'm going to skip over them quickly, and if you want to read them in full, I have a paper covering this, and I think it's going to go on the EPA website, so you can look at it more fully there. Prisoners study to kill time, to better myself, to become more informed, to get an opportunity to indulge hobbies, to get new skills. I never had the opportunity to do art and pottery before, but I also attend for a reason that's a social aspect of the prison, and I get to meet people from the outside world. I do come over to learn. Sometimes I come over as a distraction from the prison, to get out of yourself, to stop you from sinking, to get a bit of trust. You don't get a lot of that. It was just to get out of prison originally, but then I realized the benefits of it. I think it is one of the most priceless gifts you could have, education. To broaden the mind, an achievement, a chance to interact with other people, to get ready to go home, back into the workplace. One said, in prison your brain tends to get lazy. It is important to keep the mind active, otherwise it will turn to mush. Another does speak of reform, and you hear that people for whom it is a profound change in this way. I wanted to change by means of taking a personal reflection on my life and what I needed to do to change. In another research project, also in Ireland, Jane Carrigan looked at prisoner learners' perspectives within the total institution. That was her title. The term total institutions from Goffman many years ago, but it reminds us of the extent to which prison, in most countries anyway, controls and damages the person. Jane speaks of mortifications as part of prison life. That's another Goffman term. Especially reduced access to family and friends, and certainly in Ireland, the loss of a sense of safety. Not surprising then, she notes that the prison school is seen as an important place where you're free for a couple of hours, a kind of sanctuary, but also where prisoners feel respected and treated as human beings. And the motivations Jane found are again very similar. When I'm studying, it's not as if I'm in prison. It's just the door is locked, you know what I mean? It's as if it's just a bedroom really that you're sat at home, sat to study. And a young guy says, I have 2 teddy bears in there now that I made. He's a 19-year-old guy. When I get a family visit, I don't like walking out empty-handed to the kids. So whatever I want to make, I hang on to. They look great, they're better than you get in the shop. And he used to talk in our prison system anyway, and there's probably in others. Young guys in particular are very into making these soft toys. Now, I find it difficult to warm to them, but it's obviously for somebody who makes something like that and give it out to kids or to family, that's really, really important. And that's a huge role for education too. Another said, when you come up here, they don't treat you like you're a prisoner. They just treat you like you're normal. And an older man says, you can do every subject that you want to, and you might have 9 in the class, and a teacher that is qualified to teach in any school teaching you. Go outside and try to do that, not at home. So again, it's largely about making use of time, surviving the prison, gaining self-confidence and self-respect. I've been drawing on reflections and insights of men in prison in England and Ireland to argue that we need to keep in mind the broad purposes prison education can serve, and especially the crucial personal development and indeed personal survival role it can play. But we can find the same message elsewhere. Willie Owen Eichland, Kerry Magner, and Arve Asbjornsen. I have a terrible problem with Nordic names, sorry. From Bergen, along with others from Nordic countries, have conducted extensive research into prisoners' educational backgrounds, preferences, and motivations. And I hope you'll agree that their findings correspond very closely with what I've been describing in England and Ireland. The Nordic authors state, to spend my time doing something sensible and useful was the most important motivating factor in all 5 Nordic countries we're studying. In Sweden, Norway, and Iceland, more than 4 out of 5 prisoners gave that reason as very important. Other strongly motivating factors were learning about a subject and to make it easier to get a job when I am released. Once again, we see that while training for a job is an important goal for prison education, it is one among several, and not necessarily the most important one. Okay, I now wish to move towards a conclusion by drawing on some other wise voices from the international sphere who tell us what is essentially the same message, which I have been expressing as keeping a wide and deep role for education in prison. This also means, conversely, not allowing ourselves to be restricted to narrow roles, like focusing on jobs, or the fashion of the moment, like satisfying managerialism's thirst for results or prioritising programmes that claim at least to address offending behaviour. There are many authoritative voices advocating that we hold a broader view, and I will conclude with words that come out of California and Costa Rica, and finally, a wisdom I found recently in a little EPA booklet. 15 years ago, there was a symposium in the mountains of Utah, I think that's the Rocky Mountains, I'm not sure, involving prison educators from Europe and North America. Its purpose being to draft a theoretical framework for prison correctional education. Carol Eggleston, who's here, she's rather small, it's hard to see, I think she's down there. She took on the inevitable task of drafting a sort of manifesto that reflected the discussion that took place. And this is part of what she wrote. If one theme emerged over and over again in discussions, it was the need to develop and maintain a holistic view of prison correctional education and its place in our society. We, as prison correctional educators, can and should maximise the potential of individuals in criminal justice systems, minimise the damaging effect of incarceration by helping individuals to cope, enhance the process of destigmatisation and normalisation, supporting the concept that prisoners are people. Remember, some of the prisoners talked of were treated as humans here. Build the foundations for successful reintegration, create and maintain linkages with the community, promote humanisation of institutional cultures, that's some job, address the needs of the whole person, that phrase again. A fellow Californian of Carol's, Tom Gehring, has over the years stressed the importance of what he calls humanities and social science curriculum components in prison education. He lists strategies he believes we should accept and ones we should reject. Part of what Tom advocates is that we accept cultural literacy and critical thinking skills in addition to basic and marketable skills to help students think their way through life's problems. Accept social education and learning in the humanities. An aim for personal development and social responsibility based on tolerance and reciprocity, but he says we should reject what he calls the basic and marketable skills only approach. I suppose that's the Lord Hilton approach, which can result in criminals with job skills. Now, looking beyond, it's not that we should not include, we should look beyond training for jobs, is a core theme of a very impressive United Nations document, or report, in 2009, so quite recent. It's called The Right to Education of Persons in Detention, and was written by Bernard Munoz. He's a Costa Rican, and he's a Costa Rican. And a critical part of this report is that it discusses education in the context of promoting human rights. And he sees, it sees the right to education as part of the right to development. The report says, learning in prison through educational programs is generally considered to have an impact on recidivism, reintegration, and more specifically, employment outcomes upon release. Education is, however, much more than a tool for change. It is an imperative in its own right. The UN report notes that many models of prison education are not based on the concept of human dignity of all persons. Prison education, it says, should be aimed at this is interesting because I think there are echoes here with the Council of Europe report, recommendation 1, and this just came out 3 years ago. Prison education should be aimed at the full development of the whole person, requiring, among all other things, prisoner access to formal and informal education, we heard about that yesterday, literacy programs, basic education, vocational training, creative, religious and cultural activities, physical education and sports, social education, higher education and library facilities. And later on the report reiterates all persons should have the right to take part in cultural activities and education aimed at the full development of the human personality. So we're back to the whole person, and that's the United Nations report. So in words that resonate very closely with the Council of Europe some 20 years earlier, the United Nations advocates a wide and deep approach to prison education based on human rights and human dignity. Yet in my view, one of the best statements as to what prison education is about can be found among the publications of the EPA, supported in this case by the European Union Wellbeing Programme. There's a brochure in 2007 produced by the EPA. It contains a page entitled What We Stand For. It calls on us to look beyond narrow objectives. I can do no better than to quote part of it. And so I'm going to conclude with this. We're going to take 3 slides, but the interesting, I had this report probably since it came out in 07, but I didn't really look at it until the last few weeks, and I flipped through it and I noticed there are pictures there of, I think Thorfinn Langelid of Norway appears 3 times in the pictures, one remarkable picture of him dancing actually. But I only recently read that statement, what we stand for, and I'm very impressed by it, whoever wrote it or wherever the committee wrote it. And so I just concluded with that. The EPA promotes a view of prison education that is grounded in adult and community education. We believe that adult education has the capacity to transform a person's perception of self and others. And it is these perceptions that determine conduct and behaviour. In this way, adult education has the power to transform prisoners' lives by enabling them to understand, critique, and question their perceptions, assumptions, and worldview. The EPA sees education as a moral right that meets the basic human need, and within this perspective, personal development is considered to be an aim, a process, and a result of prison education. The EPA promotes a student-centred approach to prison education, one that is focused on the development of the whole person. Without doubt, this can be best achieved by providing a liberal education within a broader curriculum. In this way, the EPA recognises the power of education to transform the lives of prisoner students by broadening their sense of possibility. I think that's a great phrase, broadening their sense of possibility. Expanding their sense of a larger humanity, liberating them from the confines of unexamined assumptions, and providing them with a language and critique and of possibility. I think that should be. And finally, in short, the EPA proposes that prison education can support the prisoner towards successful re-entry into society by cultivating a combination of knowledge, skills, values and motivation necessary for active citizenship. Importantly, we advocate that prison education should not be limited to the acquisition of work-related skills and the upgrading of qualifications, but incorporate the opportunity for a significant change in understanding and worldview. So, well done, EPA.